Give me a minute and we'll ask the question, are Russian soldiers refusing to fight? Now, the short answer is we don't really know. The longer answer would be, well, look, in every conflict, there are some soldiers who refuse to fight. But then the much more complex answer is something that looks like the reality on the ground. I have no military experience. I cannot imagine what frontline conditions are like. I cannot imagine the stress and suffering of these guys. But I can imagine wanting that to end, especially if one becomes convinced that your commanders have no intention of letting you go home alive. And we've seen report after report of the horrific conditions that these guys have to live in and what's waiting for them. And increasingly, they have to know it. Increasingly, we've got these reports. They're secondhand, they're single source, they're hard to verify. But just last week in the Donetsk region, 140 soldiers are said to have been arrested and jailed for refusing to fight. This past week, up in Luhansk area, 176 soldiers are said to have been arrested and thrown in the brig for refusing to fight. We know that military tribunals that convict Russians for desertion, for refusing to follow orders, for refusing to fight, the convictions are up to over 2,200 this year. I think it's 2267. That's roughly double last year's numbers and treble 2021's numbers before the beginning of this conflict. And we're only 10 months into the year. If all of that is true, this could signal that the pressure has become so severe for the Russians on the front line that whole groups, whole battalions, whole companies are refusing to go take that hill when they're told. Now, what are the Russian soldiery being told? They're being told a couple of things. They'll be tortured and rot in jail if they refuse to fight. If they try to retreat under fire, they'll be taken out by barrier troops. We know that barrier troops right now are in use both on the Robotynya axis and on the Avdiivka axis. And they've also been told that they can't surrender because they'll be summarily executed, right? That the Ukrainians won't let them live. They don't take prisoners. This is, of course, not true. And in fact, we have lots of evidence that Russian prisoner of war exchanges, that the Russians going home look well fed and well kept and clean, while the Ukrainians coming home do not. Now, further all of this pressure, we have the National Security Advisor John Kirby, Rear Admiral John Kirby, saying in a press conference that Russian soldiers refusing to fight are being summarily executed, that they are threatening now their soldiery with summary execution at the front, and that this is a sign that the commanders know how poorly they are doing and have only the stick left to try to motivate these troops, the threat of imminent execution. The implications of this are potentially far-reaching. If the Russian army itself is at near a breaking point, should circumstances on the battlefield change in any way, it could bring us to a tipping point where we see mass surrender and the lines collapse. And I encourage the Russians to do just that. That is the smart move. That is the way to survive this war. Turn your guns on your commanders and on Moscow. where the real enemy lives.